welcome to Relish Books. Today I'm talking about The Loving Spirit by Daphne du Maurier. I'm working on reading all of her novels. It's been a while, so here we go on this one. This was not my favorite by a long shot of her books. It feels like one of her earlier ones. I'm not actually sure at what point. I think it is, though. I think it's one of her earlier novels. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. It was similar in some ways to The Glassblowers. She really likes, I think she has multiple novels like this that are like multi-generational, that span kind of this entire family history. I think she liked to write like family history through the generations. And I have two major problems with the book. It just wasn't my favorite overall. And the first one is not, it's not like an objective issue. It's more like a personal thing that I just don't really like in a book. And that is just how much time it covers and the transitions of the main characters. There's 4 main characters in the story that it swaps between, it's the Coombe family, and it starts with Janet and then goes to her son Joseph, to his son Christopher, to his daughter Jennifer. And that many switches of characters, and not just characters, but entire time periods. Sometimes it feels like the whole cast of characters kind of shift, and that can be fun, but I just don't, it's not my favorite style for a novel because it feels like it takes you out of it. It's also kind of eerie too to see these characters' entire lives, from birth to death. Not all of them cover that much space, but to have this character that you're invested in, and then their life is just over, and you move on into this new character, and then their life is over. I just don't like that much, and I feel like it takes you out of it to have that many really big shifts. And it's not like the characters aren't still connected and important, because it is about a family and the interconnectedness of a family, and the loving spirit refers to this idea of the first character, Janet, her spirit being passed on through the generations. There's almost like this supernatural flavor to it as well, where she can appear to them at times or speak to them. Her spirit lives on through them, supporting them, giving them help in times of trouble, that kind of thing. So it's not like the first characters are just gone and we totally swap to somebody unrelated, but I still just, I don't know. It's hard to be deeply invested in the story when it changes so much, when there's so many different characters. It feels like it should be like a series of 4 books, instead of just one. That being said, she does it very well, I think, as far as the time period shifts. The first section was both my favorite and my least favorite at the same time, because I feel like the way that they talked, the way that they spoke is much more old-fashioned at the beginning, and I feel like her skill as a writer wasn't maybe quite up to doing that in a way where it wasn't a little bit cringy, their old-fashioned speech. But at the same time, I was the most invested and interested in Janet's character, I think. And so, yeah, I was sad when that section ended. So that's my first issue, is just the spanning of that much time in characters. It's 100 years from 1830 to 1930. And the second issue, again, with this idea of the loving spirit that's passed on, and it's a little bit of like supernaturalness in the book. So these people generally the Coombe family tend to have large families. I think, just in that culture, it's this little town of Plyn off the Cornish coast. And the spirit seems to only pass in its full force at least, only like passes through one child. And so in the first section, you have Janet, who is wild and independent. And then she gets married, and she does love her husband very much, and she loves her children, but she's waiting for someone that she knows she's going to love best of all. She's waiting for this great, passionate love of her life. And that comes in the form of her third son, Joseph, who really possesses her spirit to the point where it's almost like they can read each other's thoughts and minds. They understand each other just perfectly, way more than ordinary people would. And so, again, it's a little bit supernatural, but I really didn't like that aspect of it only passing down through one particular person, because you have this element of extreme favoritism. You know, she is like, yes, I love my husband, I love my children, but this person is the greatest love of my life. And I'm like, well, that's not too nice to all the others. And just the way that they were portrayed as being almost like they're good people, but like boring in comparison to Joseph. And I feel like that did shift by the end of the book in a way that was powerful, where you see it's kind of like, okay, those dull people were actually the good ones all along, in a sense. And that message is definitely there. And so there's some redemption in that, I think, to that problem at the beginning of the book. Because at the beginning it's not really written as if that is an issue. But I think that's just, the way that it is. But I didn't like that. I was like, that's not nice. And showing favoritism, having favoritism like that is always going to cause issues, which it definitely does further down the road. And also the way that the relationship was written, the mother and son having this really fierce, passionate love. I was just like, okay, this is a little bit weird, a little bit uncomfortable. I don't like that. There's been a couple other books that I've read that had similar kind of relationship dynamics where the mother and son are written, their dialogue, the way they interact is almost, and it's not meant to be this way at all, but it's more reminiscent of like lovers, the way that they speak and the way that they their obsession with each other, and that's just uncomfortable. I don't like that. But yeah, so there's that. And then I think it was even more of a problem for me with Joseph, who ends up being a really bad person in pretty much every area of his life. He's really pretty terrible. But when he has children, he has 3, I think. He only cares about the first one. Like, the others are like, they're okay, but he's only interested. All his focus, all his affection, all his hopes and dreams are tied up in that firstborn son. And partly because he has like Janet's eyes or whatever. And it's like, you don't even care that you have these other children. That's terrible. And he is a terrible person in a lot of ways. But it doesn't really point out or draw out that there's anything terrible about that, especially with that, with their dynamic. That he's only interested in that first son. And I'm like, and when the son disappoints him, it's like his life is over. He's just, torn up about it. And it's like, you have other sons. Good grief. But anyway, so there's that. Joseph is a bad dude. And anyway, and then Christopher, he's a different one. I liked too that it's like her spirit that's passing through them. But Christopher is not like the other 3 main characters. He's very different. He kind of has to come to his strength and his independence later in life. And so I like that different one in there. His story was probably the most heartfelt and touching to me. And then his daughter, Jennifer, kind of being like a more modern new world, Janet. Which brings me to the thing that I really did like about the book and appreciate. Because the theme of it and the moral and what I came out of it feeling like the message was very different than what I thought it was going to be at the beginning, because there's a lot of talk in Janet's section, in the 1830s, when she's becoming a wife, becoming a mother, and she so much wants and longs to go to sea, to be a sailor. She wishes that she were a man so she could have had the opportunities that she doesn't have as a woman. And it really sets the stage for being a story of she didn't have the opportunities because she's a woman. And so I thought that it was going to be like, in the generations to follow, like 100 years from now, maybe her great granddaughter is going to get those opportunities that were denied to her great grandmother, because in the New World. And that's really not the story that it told. It seems like it's going to be this about with a lot of themes about like women's rights and the way that she was repressed and didn't have opportunities. And it speaks in kind of a negative way in that first section. It really talks down to the idea of only being a wife and only being a mother. And those ideas and books that are about that, about women who didn't have opportunities back in the day and stuff, there are some good ones out there. The first maybe 1,000 books that were written about that were okay, but it's such a tired theme. It's like we have a million stories about that. It's, women have all these opportunities, have every opportunity in the world nowadays, and so much of our shows and our books is still focused on that. It's still like, oh, because they were women, they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that, and there's this rebellion against that in these stories. And again, that can make a good story, but it's so tired. And I really thought that that's what this book was going to be. And it really kind of completely turns around and ends up being about home and about family and the importance of that. As each of these characters goes out and leads their lives and then finds that they can only actually have peace and happiness back at home and in finding love and in raising families, which is really the opposite of what it starts out as. And it's kind of a subtle turnaround to that, which was really interesting. I just think it's, surprising that ended up being the theme when Janet's feelings were were presented as totally authentic at the beginning of the book. This longing to break away from her life and to have freedom and adventures. And she does find fulfillment in that because her spirit, lives vicariously through her son, Joseph, who loves the sea and gets to go on all these adventures and be a sailor and live the life that she wanted. And yet, ultimately, when it comes back around to the great granddaughter, who also has this restless, independent spirit, she finds her peace and fulfillment in coming home and in realizing the life that Janet had the whole time in raising her family is actually the exact thing that she's looking for. After having lived in a city and worked all these different jobs, and she finds that she needs to come home. And I thought that was just really powerful, and powerful too in that the feelings and longings of all the characters were still real. Janet did have those feelings of restlessness and wanting to be free and all that, but kind of this culmination of it, finding peace at home in the end, because her spirit is still there. And it's like there's this idea through the book that her spirit lives in her figurehead that's on the ship that's named after her, that her son sailed. And there's this final scene, there's a little spoiler, but there's this final scene in the book where the figurehead is placed on their house, like out of the front of their son's bedroom, where her spirit can finally really come to rest, which is just, so I thought that imagery was beautiful. And I think we need, and again, this book overall was not my favorite. The way things were presented, I had some issues with the writing and stuff, but we need more literature that kind of shows that perspective, because again, so many of our modern shows and books speak very disrespectfully and dismissively to the idea of having children, to raising families, and there's nothing wrong with longing for adventures and longing for excitement, and we want to read about those things, we want to do those things, but I wish there were more books and shows that show this perspective that having children is a tremendous adventure and raising a family is tremendously exciting and fulfilling. I think most books miss that, and so I did appreciate that very much about this, and those were worthwhile things that I found amongst a bunch of characters that I didn't really like. No one was very likable. Her writing, Daphne du Maurier's writing, comes through beautifully at times, because her command of language, even at this stage, is incredible. I think she just hadn't found the right characters to really properly embody it. Some of her dialogue, especially later on in the book, you can be like, okay, there, I see it. I see her genius coming through, because she is so good. Her turns of phrase, her descriptions of every little thing. If you break it down and look at the way that she describes things, her sentences, her just her descriptions, her turns of phrase are incredible. Really amazing writer. I just think that her setting for this one and her character developments were not as on point as some of her other stuff. Most of while I was reading it, I was feeling like it wasn't really worth reading. But by the end, I think I am glad that I read it. She definitely got her little flair in there. It has some extremely dramatic stuff where you're kind of like rolling your eyes, because it's so what's the word? I don't know, grotesque in some ways and dramatic. Some horror elements thrown in there along with the supernatural. But yeah, an interesting read for sure. I don't know if I would say I recommend it, but a lot of good and bad mixed up in there. So anyway, sorry this went a little long. I did have very mixed feelings about it. I was trying to sort out, but thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.